Welcome, everybody, to the Cone of Shame Veterinary Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Andy Roark. Guys, I got to go in for you today. I am here with Ryan Leech. He is the host of the podcast, The Birdbath. He does a podcast all about the, plate tectonic level movements of the vet industry. So he talks a lot about earnings in the big pharma companies. He talks a lot about consolidation, where groups of practices buy other groups of practices, or who gets big venture capital investments. I think that stuff is interesting. I don't track it like Ryan does, but that's his jam. He's all about where is the money going into our profession? Where is it coming from? I hate to say it, but boy, you can figure out a lot about what's going on in our profession by looking at where the money comes from. And so anyway, that's his jam. I wanted to talk to him today about what's going on as far as consolidation among practice groups. We see groups of practices buying other groups of practices. It had slowed down. It is picking back up and has continued to pick back up. I talked to him about is that true? Where does that go? Does he see it going on? Are we looking at the economy and thinking maybe there's a recession and this is going to change? He has thoughts on all of these. And again, we're kind of gazing into the crystal ball here. It's a very interesting conversation about big level, high level, what is going on in our profession and what is it going to look like in the coming years. So Ryan's got some good ideas. Let's get into this episode.
This is your show. We're glad you're here. We want to help you in your veterinary career. Welcome to the Cone of Shame with Dr. Andy Roark.
Welcome to the podcast, Ryan Leech. Thanks for being here, my friend.
Thanks for having me back. I always enjoy listening, and honestly, if you know me, I enjoy participating more than listening.
You're like me. I like to be an active participant in my conversations.
Yes, I like to talk about it, not just listen to it. So Thanks for having me. I'm excited for what we're going to talk about today. I know you brought me in. Yeah. And I'm ready. But I told you not to prep me on anything.
That's right.
We can have a raw and fun conversation.
That's good, because I've got some stuff I'm working on. Okay, for those who do not know you, you are the host of probably the podcast I would consider to be the most required listening in vet medicine, aside from my own.
I'll take it.
But other than mine,
the number two podcast host on this show.
Exactly. In my estimation, you're probably the number 2 podcast host in the industry. No. You are the host of the Birdbath, which is this really great. It's very short. It's weekly. It is a recap of what is happening at the industry level of vet medicine. So you talk a lot about the earnings reports of the different pharma companies. You talk about consolidation. You talk about what practice groups have bought other groups and what they're doing. Yep. And that may sound ridiculously boring to people who are in the trenches of vet medicine. I get it. However, it is basically a report of how the landscape that we live on is changing and fluctuating. So I really encourage people, if you haven't given the podcast a try, you should just listen to it. It's something that's really good to just keep checking in on, because the things that Ryan talks about are the things that come to fruition and affect our lives in the practices, a year down the line.
Yeah. And the thing, though, about the show because if you're not in the vet industry, you shouldn't listen. You'll be so bored. Unless you're wanting to invest in it or do something. But
I tried to get my wife to listen one time in the car, and she was like, we're not doing this.
Yeah, my wife doesn't even listen to it. You'd think she would, but yeah, the thing is, I want it to be a kennel attendant driving into their first day of work, and I want Kristen Peck at Zoetis to both be able to listen and leave with something that they didn't know was happening in the space. So it's supposed to be extremely digestible. It's less than 15 minutes every single week. We just had our 1-year anniversary with it. So I'm really, really happy with the show.
Well, you do a really good job of taking this stuff, and it is very accessible. Just between you and me, just between you and me and everyone listening. I think you do a good job of saying, this is what this means, or this is why this result could be important going forward. I think you do that really well. You are also a consultant in the veterinary industry. You work with companies that are interested in entering the vet space or working this vet space and want to grow. So
all the things I talk about on the Birdbath are kind of my preppers in my mind of how to help businesses grow in the vet space or enter the U.S. market or things like that.
So that's great. And it brings me to kind of what I wanted to ambush you with today. So it's this. I wrote a little newsletter. So I write newsletters every week, and I just often kind of write about what I'm thinking about, things that people say to me. And so I wrote recently this little newsletter and called it that eventually the numbers have to work. And the basic premise, Ryan, is I've talked to some veterinary students who are getting close to graduation, and they were talking about signing bonuses and salaries for some of their graduating vet students, and I'm going, oh my God, you got to be kidding me. And again, no shade on the vet students, but it's just, wow. And then I talked to some of my friends or people who run Uncharted, and they have their own hospitals, they're private practice owners, and they're like, I cannot afford to hire a new graduate at the rates that they're getting from other places. And it's just really interesting when I hear these sort of concerns from practice owners, and I hear these things from vets that are looking at these contracts and things, and I go, I just want to lean in and say, guys, eventually the numbers have to work. Like at some point, no one's doing this as a charity. Like this is all investment, and ultimately the numbers have to work. And so I've been looking at that and thinking about that. And I think it's sort of a testament to how our profession has been stretched by private equity money coming in, by investment coming in, by corporate consolidation, where people are willing to do things to acquire practices that don't make sense in the short term and that most of us could never afford to do. But the idea is down the road, this will make sense. And so I'm really interested in talking with you today a little bit about how the numbers eventually make sense. You've been covering a lot in terms of consolidation within our industry. The last couple of months, it seems like there has just really been a huge amount of movement as far as companies that own vet practices buying other companies that own vet practices. And so I wanted to come in and get an overview, sort of like every week you're doing a report from the week. I would really like to get sort of a review discussion from you of what do you see going on over the last 6-12 months as far as corporate consolidation. And then I want to get into what do you think that looks like and what is that going to mean going forward? So let me just sort of pause here and say, am I capturing this correctly? Do you agree that there seems to be increasing momentum in terms of consolidation in our industry?
Without a doubt. There is definitely a rejuvenation of the veterinary consolidation that's happening. There was about a 18-month sort of slowdown that we saw in the previous 18 months or 2023, part of 2022. It slowed down a lot. And there's a ton of economic factors that play into that. But the thing is, it has shifted back now. People are acquiring practices. I would say just roughly estimating in the last 6 months, in just the US alone, there have been $2 to $4 billion worth of consolidation and investment in vet practices. So it is definitely growing and taking off. There's a massive deal that's on the horizon that, depending on when this comes out, people will either know about it or they'll have heard rumors about it. But yeah, there's a lot going on. It's going to continue to happen. We've got just the shrinking of the number of players that are owning the practices is happening as well. So it's big. One thing I will say, though, that I think was interesting when you're saying the numbers need to make sense.
Yes.
That is kind of what happened 18 months ago. And for the past 18 months or the past 18 months of slowdown was the numbers didn't make sense.
Right.
So you had groups that were acquiring practices where the numbers didn't make sense. And they were playing hot potato basically with these practices. And they were just saying, yeah, someone else will take it, someone else will take it, someone else will take it. And they weren't making these improvements within the businesses. And eventually, when the money slowed down, they were caught and kept holding the bag of all these practices where they had never intended to actually run them or improve them or perform the practices. And now the numbers didn't make sense, which is now causing a bit of a paradigm shift where people are needing to do things that improve the financials of the businesses that they own.
Do you think that that's an accurate metaphor? So the hot potato, I want to go back to that. So what you're saying is there were players, and there were definitely players, who had no intention of actually running the hospitals they were buying. They were buying them, they were rolling them together, and the whole plan was we're going to sell this to somebody else as a bigger bundle, and we're going to get a bigger multiple because instead of buying, 10 practices, they're buying 100 practices, and we're going to jack the multiple up, and we're going to get out of here, having never actually, quote unquote, run these vet hospitals. And I could see that, and you would see some of the groups, and you thought these people clearly don't have any real intention of wading into the operations side.
Right.
And then it seems like the buying frenzy just sort of stopped, and the people at the top who were supposed to buy up everybody else, they stopped buying, and the people under them stopped buying, and the whole thing kind of backed down. And then you had some very responsible, very smart people who were holding practices and running them well. But you also had some people who were like, oh crap, I thought I'd be out of this deal in 6 more months. And now it looks like I'm in the business of running 100 vet hospitals or 25 vet hospitals or whatever. And so is that sort of the hot potato metaphor? Is
That's
you
the
ended
hot
up with some
potato,
hospital?
yeah. Because I played in that world with Galaxy Vets that I was on the founding team of, and I was pitching to practices that wanted to sell practices against a lot of those. And the first question that a lot of people would say is, what are you going to change? And there's an entire world of veterinary consolidators where their motto was, we're not going to touch anything. And in a lot of them, they never did. You never saw them. The paychecks just changed names on them. Maybe they had a new bookkeeping system in the back end to be able to consolidate the numbers, but they didn't do anything. And that was what the seller in a lot of situations wanted. They wanted to be able to liquidate their sale of the practice. But the problem came when that hot potato, when you were the one caught holding it and you had to start operating the practice, and then you realized, well, you can't improve a business without making changes.
Yes.
And so now they're having to say, yeah, we're going to make a few changes here and there. And they're like, whoa, I want to keep running my business exactly how it was. And the difficulty there is it's not your business anymore. It's the group's business. And whether they said they wouldn't change anything or they said they would, ultimately it comes down to whatever they want to do. It's their business to do.
Eventually the numbers have to make sense, right? There's no world where they can buy your practice, pay way more than it would be traditionally worth, and then not change anything, and everybody's okay with it's not going to happen. If they're going to pay a lot, they're going to try to increase efficiency and do things to make that practice justify what they paid for it. And so it's that warning advice that I've been kind of leaning into is, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And ultimately the numbers have to make sense. And so I do feel like days of getting bought and no one touching anything, they feel like they're largely over to me, unless you do have a corporate group that is serious about wanting individual practices to control their own culture. I mean, and at this point, you could tell that they're not screwing around. They will have made some changes and stuff, but there are some people who they were serious about it from the beginning, and they have put their money where their mouth is. And I don't want to badmouth those groups, but that was not what most people were doing when they were saying we won't change anything.
I believe, and I've said it, and I'm happy to say it again publicly as many times as possible, I think that consolidation can be a greater good for the industry as a whole. When done in its most altruistic and true fashion, I do think that consolidation can help the veterinary industry. It allows people that didn't want to own a practice to liquidate their largest asset and continue practicing medicine and focus on that. Now, there's a mountain of things that can be terrible about consolidation, and it wasn't unique to the veterinary space. It's if you have a favorite restaurant that you started seeing a bunch of them popping up all over and they turned into a chain and then the quality of the food went down, it's usually interesting to Google the name of the restaurant and then type the word investor, and you'll find that they had some outside investor that didn't have any history in that space and just poured money in, and they lost what really made it there. But I think the really interesting practices that don't need things changed, what you almost find there is that the owners of those practices either aren't looking to sell because they're bringing in enough profit and enough revenue to be able to sustain a very healthy business without having a boss, or they're actually the ones that are being approached by groups or private equity companies that are saying, hey, can you replicate what you did here? And they're actually the ones creating these new brands and these new de novo or fresh built out strategies that are replicating their formula across the industry.
Hey guys, communication is key to creating amazing experiences in the clinic. From the phones to the front desk to the exam room, the way our teams interact with pet owners makes a difference. The team training bundle I have at drandyroark.com brings together my Charming the Angry Client and Exam Room Communication Toolkit courses to provide flexible, on-demand communication training for your veterinary practice. Check them out. These courses are made to be taken in groups. They have discussion questions. They are all about taking these trainings and getting them to apply to your practice, your culture, and your clients, whether it's handling angry clients or being effective in the exam room. We've got some great training resources that you can grab and drop and use pieces of. They're all broken up into 5-minute modules to make it super easy for you to use what you want and skip over what you don't want. Tag them onto the end of staff meetings or just make a whole staff meeting out of the trainings. Anyway, super flexible. It's drandyroark.com/team training. Gang, let's get back into this episode. I've heard it said that what sort of happened in medicine as far as consolidation has been seen again and again in other industries, and it's fairly predictable cycle, as the way it was put to me is. We have these periods of consolidation, and they start out and there's a lot of players and everyone's grabbing up practices. And ultimately, the prediction that I heard was we were going to end up with about seven significant players, something like that. Do you think that we're tacking towards that?
Definitely. I like to look at the European market as a precursor to what the US market is doing on quite a few things in the vet space. It's interesting if you look at where the UK was 8 years ago and where we are today, they're very similar worlds. I was predicting this on pet insurance. I don't know if it's going to happen. I had some cool conversations with people around actual legality differences between the two. But in the consolidation market, the same thing happened in the UK. They had dozens of smaller players acquiring practices, and then Vet Partners came through there. IVC Evidensia and Mars came in, acquired much of those practices. CVS Group, which is massive in Europe, as well as Swedish family that I'm completely forgetting the name, but they probably own a lot of things. And those just continued to consolidate those. So there's about 5 to 7 major players in the UK market, and we're now actually starting to see a few of those make investments first in Canada, which is pretty common that we see because the US market it's tough. It's a very tough place to survive and be. But a lot of companies that are coming from overseas move to Canada and start that as their North American footprint. And then we start to see them making some investments. So we saw this with Peloton, which recently made an investment in Lakefield Group. They own a group of practices called P3 in Canada. And they just made this investment in Lakefield, which is a very well-respected family-run business by a Canadian family as well. But they have a U.S. footprint, and so we're starting to see that trickle through of the border there, and I think we'll continue to see that.
So where does this ultimately go for people on the ground, Ryan? So is this are we getting near the end of the period of sort of radical change in a lot of practices? Are we going to be stable in about 5 years and you'll be in the program that you're going to be? Or do you think things are going to continue to shift as far as new ownership, new way of doing things, get ready for more change?
We're still well below a 50% threshold of consolidated practices. The UK is 70 to 80% consolidated. So if you take what I just said, you should expect to continue to see independent practices being acquired and rolled up. I do think that one of the main things that comes by finding operational improvement in practices is, one, technology is one of the quick ways that a lot of people look at that. Come from a PIMS background in a lot of worlds. I think that you could start to see more of the unification of a practice management system across groups. So I guess one word of advice, if you're in a corporately owned practice and anyone says, hey, we're thinking about doing this, if you want your voice heard, raise your hand and be the one that offers to beta test them or check them out or do the demos. Because I do know that these larger groups in a lot of situations don't have as many boots on the ground experience. And they will really want to hear from the people in the clinics that are excited about embracing the change. So if your practice is sold and it's owned by a large group, you're not going to stop the wave of change.
Yeah.
But you can probably direct the flow to places where you feel like it's going to do the things that got you excited about practicing veterinary medicine.
I do like that. I think a lot of times if we dig in our heels, we just get plowed over.
And then you get this, the thing that happens then is we begin this continuous conversation where people say, I'll never work at a corporately owned clinic. They don't ever listen. And it's like, well, did you also, was it a collaboration or was it a line in the sand that either side put? I think there's great employers that are corporate groups and there's great employers that are independent groups and the flip side for both.
I'm seeing this trend of consolidation and practice groups buying other practice groups. And at the same time, I'm starting to hear more and more grumblings about uncertainty around the economy, I'm hearing people sort of start to talk about a recession. There's definitely been more guarding of budgets on the industry side, things like that are starting to shape up. How do those two forces interact, Ryan? Are we looking at a pause in consolidation, do you think? Do you think that corporate consolidation is going to continue on at this rate unaffected in the short term? What is your sort of feeling there?
First off, if I put a big asterisk on my face, I'm not an economist in any way. I read and listen to a lot of it, but one thing that, if you look at like, I'm not going to say we're going to have a Great Depression, right?
Yeah.
But who left the Great Depression in the best system? Like, who was in the best place at the end of the Great Depression? Were the people that had the most money at the beginning of the Great Depression. And if you look at the contraction of that distribution of wealth and how that affects a recession, you're not going to bankrupt a private equity group unless you do something like GameStop did with Citadel.
Yeah.
If you haven't heard that whole dumb money story, that's the only way these companies ultimately do get taken down. But you're not going to bankrupt one of these companies by them not being successful with 100 veterinary practices that they bought. So I think they have the deep enough pockets to wait out things that what you might see then is Dr. Jones, who owns a practice and was thinking of retirement, but the value of their practice has been falling over the last 18 months or 24 months. And they're going, well, I still want to retire. Okay, well, maybe I'll sell it for less than I would have or what I thought it was going to. But so now the people that had the more money have the money and they can still afford to pay somebody that wants to find liquidity. Yeah. So I don't think it's going to slow down.
Do you think that sort of ongoing consolidation, we've seen veterinary salaries go up, and I think that's probably partly supply and demand. It's probably more than partly supply and demand. It's a big piece of it. It's hard to get veterinarians. Do you see those types of impacts trickling down to the support staff? Whenever we start to talk about the numbers have to work, the comment section fills up with technicians saying, I need to make more money. I should have a living wage. And I think that there's truth to that. I'm not, exactly. I'm not downplaying that at all. Is there any clarity as far as when we're looking at what's happening at the industry level that would say it's likely, or this is going to continue to be a point of we're trying to maximize shareholder value, and so it's going to be hard to see an increase in salaries for staff? I don't know if there's any ideas there.
There's definitely some ideas and there's some trends that are happening. I think one is that we saw and we continue to see the prices of veterinary services increase. Yeah. There's two sides to that. From looking at financials of a lot of practices, there are a lot of practices that I think were acquired because they were seen as places where the prices weren't increased. I think everyone knows a vet practice that they could walk into and see something on the shelf that's being sold for less than what they bought it for because they haven't updated their system.
Right.
And as a private equity group, if you look at that, you go, all I have to do is start charging at least what we're paying for it and I can make more profit. It's not rocket science.
Yeah.
So I think you see that. I do believe, though, that we are seeing a continued increase in the demand for proper technician utilization. Yeah. And I think that we might begin to continue to see that as newer veterinarians graduate. I know that there's always been the doctor versus technician divide in some ways. And not to say it's acrimonious or evil in any way. There's just always been sort of these are doctor roles, these are technician roles. The two shall not meet. But I do think that a younger generation is less rigid in their beliefs of hierarchy within spaces. It's a generation of veterinarians that are coming out that some of them probably called their elementary school teachers by their first name because that was expected of them. And so when you have someone like that coming out, they're probably not walking into a clinic with a technician that's been there for 20 years and saying, I'm the doctor, you do what I say.
Right.
They're saying, hey, Amy, what's going on? And hey, this is what we do. Okay, cool. Oh, that's so helpful. And then I also think that there's an ability and an opportunity through consolidation for technicians to be able to improve and increase their skill set, which is much easier for a business to stomach as a reason to give someone more money than if we just say, I've been doing this for a long time, the business is doing well, give me more of this.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think that's the difference there.
No, I think you're right. I think that's the key. I am very optimistic about technicians in the future and support staff in the future. I think that they are going to continue to make more money. And I think that's going to go hand in hand with them being better utilized and having more responsibilities and things like that. I don't think hey, we're just going to ratchet salaries up. I don't think that's going to happen. Not even that it's not justified. It's just, I don't see it. I don't see it happening. Yeah. But I do think there's opportunities. I think that there are things, I'm with you in that I am an optimist. I want to believe that consolidation can bring around good things, and I certainly can. I hope it will. But there are paths with consolidation with bigger organizations where care stays affordable to pet owners, support staff get to do more things, get to earn better salaries, and then veterinarians get to stay engaged and be the center of the healthcare experience for pets and pet owners. And so I think that is absolutely possible. I hope that veterinarians get excited and engaged and pushed to make that happen. Back to the earlier discussion we were having about digging your heels in, I think that if you do dig your heels in and you say, I don't want to play with these companies, I don't want to play with this hospital group, I don't think they care what you want, and I think you're going to get squished. I think the best thing you can do is jump in and say, how can I participate? Where can I lend insight? What can I pilot here and give you feedback on? And I think that's the path.
That's part of why I do my podcast too, right? If you have the knowledge that the corporate group is looking at as well, and you can find an understanding of, wow, my parent company just brought in, $300 million in growth equity investment. And then you go to them and say, hey, I know you want to grow these businesses. Can we grow our revenue within our practice by looking at these 3 other businesses that I heard about? That's kind of one of the reasons my sister-in-law's a vet. And at her graduation, one of her colleagues or fellow students was telling me about the practice they worked at. And they said, well, it's not owned by a corporate group, but they manage it. And I said, that's not how that works. And we went through and she was like, no. And I said, do you have a pay stub? And she said, yeah, I have one on my phone. And pulled up the name of the company was there. I said, that's who owns your practice. The former owner still works there, but they don't own it. So understanding what that means and who, if you want to ask a question or reach out to, or make sure you have health insurance. There's things that you can demand from a much larger company that they can afford as well. Like you said, the money has to make sense. They have more of it, they can afford it, but it has to make sense as a reason to give it out.
Ryan, thanks so much for being here and talking through this with me. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I have a couple of places you can find me online. You can always find me on LinkedIn, every social media. Plus, I've got the birdbath.io, so you can find all of the latest episodes of the podcast. And I also have first100.io. But anywhere you want to reach out to me, I'm not hard to find. And it's Leech. Put that in. There's a professional BMX biker, but he's a different guy than me.
Sounds good. Brian, thanks for being here. Guys, thanks for tuning in and listening. Take care of yourselves, everybody. I'll see you later.
Thanks, Andy.
And that's it. That's what I got for you guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got a ton out of it. Thanks to Ryan for being here. Thanks to you for being here. If you enjoyed the episode, leave me an honest review wherever you get your podcast. This is how people find us, and it just means a lot to me. Anyway, gang, take care of yourselves. Be well. I'll talk to you later. Bye.